Welcome to MISD Assessment's Guide to TEA's 2018 Accountability System for Public Schools in Texas. Brought to you by the Mansfield ISD Department of Assessment, Accountability, and Analysis. So, you want to find out more about state accountability, and you want more than just the basics. If so, you might regret what you wished for, but this video is for you. Over the next 13 minutes, we won't dive into every detail found in the 158 total pages of the Accountability Manual, but we will peel back the curtain a bit on how TEA determines accountability ratings. So, let's begin. The 2018 Accountability System traces its roots back to 2015 and House Bill 2804, which mandated that public schools be evaluated on a traditional A, B, C, D, F basis using 5 different domains. In 2017, the Texas legislature revised that system with House Bill 22, trimming the domains to only 3 but maintaining the letter grade rating requirement. The intent of the law is to make school accountability simple and intuitive for stakeholders. But as you'll see, the process of assessing school performance is anything but simple. Given the thousands of schools in Texas, plus their millions of students and teachers, any attempt to reduce school accountability down to one of 5 letter grades was always destined for pitfalls. TEA began with each of the 5 letter grades and attached previously used terminology for easier understanding. Scoring for each letter grade was assigned based on the most familiar grading systems traditionally used in schools. House Bill 22 mandates that districts and campuses are rated in 3 domains, similar but not identical to the indices employed in the previous accountability system. TEA's task was to devise a way to score every district and campus on this 100-point scale and assign a rating for each domain, then to establish a method for also assigning an overall rating. For the student achievement domain, TEA began with the performance standards adopted in 2017 and used a simple formula: the mean average of the percent of students scoring at each level. For a given district or campus, take the masters, meets, and approaches percentages, add them together, then divide by 3 to get the star component raw score. We'll discuss why the term raw score is important later on. This average is simple, and most of the time, the star raw score will fall close to the meets percentage, but it's a flawed number. For example, suppose a campus had 95% of its students achieve approaches on all STAR tests, but only half of them achieved meets and 40% achieved masters. The average of those 3 percentages is 61.7, rounded to 62. Mathematically, that 62 is correct, but statistically, it's meaningless. It tells you nothing about the student's achievement at any of the 3 performance levels, understating the 95 and overstating the 50 and 40 that went into producing it. The connection between the performance levels and the average is, simply put, weak. Now, for high schools, student achievement also includes the graduation rate and a score for college, career, and military readiness, or CCMR. CCMR points are awarded according to the criteria shown on this chart. The CCMR raw score is the CCMR points earned as a percentage of the total graduates. A student earns up to 1 point for achieving at least 1 indicator, which makes the math easier, but this total is also flawed. Students achieving more than 1 indicator still accrue only 1 point. More importantly, every indicator is considered equal, so a student who earns an associate's degree, the equivalent of 2 years college credit, counts the same as a student who completes a single 3-hour dual-credit math course, the equivalent of only 1 college math course. The simplicity of allowing a maximum 1 point per student potentially understates high-achieving students. The next domain is school progress, which includes 2 components: Part A, academic growth, and Part B, relative performance. Academic growth might be the most complex part of the new accountability system. It's based off of 2 quantities derived from consecutive STAR scores. One is the student's performance level compared to the previous year. The other is the student's STAR progress measure, which is calculated using a completely different algorithm. That's a can of worms we won't open here. The chart to the right shows the 16 possible scenarios for each student with valid consecutive star scores, also called progress measures. 11 scenarios derive strictly from comparing last year's score to this year's. The other 5 also factor in the star progress measure. The academic growth raw score is the points earned as a percentage of the students with a valid progress measure. The flaws in this score arise first from the exclusion of some students. For instance, if a student transferred from out of state, that student is omitted due to no previous year's star score, despite the student's progress in the actual classroom. This chart mixes two separate quantities in determining scores, and it does not offer any extra credit for accelerated growth. Students who make greater gains are scored the same as those who make gains designated as expected. In fact, this scoring method is particularly punitive because a student whose star performance moves backward, even if only because of a single multiple-choice question, accrues 0 points towards this score. Perhaps the biggest flaw in this methodology is that it attempts to define academic growth solely off of differences in two multiple-choice tests taken a full year apart, each of which covers different curricula. School Progress Part B, Relative Performance, is brand new to TEA Accountability in 2018. This component is the simpler part of School Progress and is predicated on the theory that student achievement and economic disadvantage vary inversely, as shown on the graph to the right. The goal of the calculation process in this component is to evaluate districts and campuses compared to those with similar percentages of economically disadvantaged students, as represented by these two red lines. Students with higher economic means, represented by line 1, will inherently perform differently than students with higher economic disadvantage, represented by line 2. Finally, we come to the Closing the Gaps domain, which includes portions of the previous accountability system merged with mandates from the U.S. Department of Education. Closing the Gaps examines performance data in 4 different components across up to 14 different student groups, as shown on this table. In total, up to 84 possible indicators, each with its own target, could be examined. Those indicators are distributed according to the 4 components, and each component raw score is the indicators met as a percentage of the indicators evaluated. The raw score for Closing the Gaps is actually calculated after statistical weights are assigned, according to this table. It's worth noting here on footnote 1 pertaining to English language proficiency that the U.S. Department of Education has denied TEA's waiver request, so that component will in fact account for 10% of the raw score in 2018. If you've made it this far without getting overwhelmed or bored, congratulations! You probably thought you were done. But now you get to see why we keep mentioning raw scores. TEA doesn't base the actual ratings off of these raw scores. They first have to convert them to scaled scores to fit the 100-point scale correlated to the ratings. What that means first is determining what's called a cut score using one of these tables. For STAR and CCMR, for graduation rate, for School Progress Part A, and Part B. That Part B table is a tiny excerpt from 3 pages, by the way, and for Closing the Gaps. But that's not all. The appropriate cut score table is then used to determine which of these 5 fabulous formulas is used to calculate the scaled score. And for the student achievement domain, there's even one more step, because the score for this domain is determined based on the type of campus. Once the scaled scores are determined, TEA can assign the rating for each domain. Keep in mind, campuses receive one of only 2 ratings in 2018, while districts will receive a letter grade rating. The overall rating is determined by taking the better scaled score from student achievement or school progress and counting it as 70% of the overall score, with the scaled score for Closing the Gaps accounting for the remaining 30%. Let's look at a sample campus calculation of an overall rating. Scaled scores for each domain are provided in the first column. The next step is to examine parts A and B of school progress. Because 62 on part B is higher, it's used to assign the official rating for the school progress domain. For the overall rating, that 62 is compared with the student achievement score. Because 78 is higher, it accounts for 70% of the overall rating. The closing the gap score is used for the other 30% of the overall rating. The overall score rounds to 80, which is Met Standard in 2018, and B for 2019 and beyond. But that B rating is, you guessed it, flawed. For one thing, with this campus, that B rating hides a grade of F on School Progress Part A and D on School Progress Part B. For another thing, let's look at a different campus. This campus has higher scaled scores on all domains, but using the same better of approach and 70-30 breakdown, the overall score of 89 also nets a rating of Met Standard in 2018 and B in 2019 and beyond. A casual observer checking school ratings on the web in 2019 or later would see ratings of B for both of these campuses and might conclude that their performance is equivalent. Simple? Absolutely. Accurate? Well. So, what's critical to remember about this new accountability system? First, despite the simple intuitive intentions of the law, realize that it's still a complex system with a multitude of data points and several layers of calculations. TEA officials did the best they could to use available data and past methodologies to craft a system that boiled all that data down to a handful of letter grades. But in doing so, they had to make compromises to keep it manageable. Those compromises led to flaws. That's just the nature of statistical analysis. Remember also that the bulk of state accountability is still derived from a single test administered on a single day each year. It's not like an employee receiving a performance review based on daily data or a company filing quarterly reports. If you're truly interested in how a district or campus is serving students, feel free to study the accountability domain data, but look beyond the letter grades and also examine the distinction data, which is compared to demographically similar campuses. Ask your school for local assessment data and other publicly available reports. And most importantly, visit the school, check out what's happening in classrooms, and ask teachers and administrators what you can do to help them succeed. If successful schools depend on schools, parents, and community working together, then accountability has to be about more than just the actions of teachers and staff. If you'd like more information about the 2018 accountability system, visit the URL listed on screen. If you'd like to offer feedback about the system, feel free to contact TEA's Performance Reporting Division, or you can make direct contact to your Texas legislator. Thanks for watching.